Hello everybody. So in today's quick video, I want to ask a question. Are Zoom, Roku, and fuboTV undervalued stocks? And so these are all stocks that have came up a few times in the comments section of this channel. Many of you have recommended them. And so I am going through my valuation spreadsheet, which is my hyper-growth valuation spreadsheet, where I ask the question, the all-important question, how much am I paying for each percentage point of forward growth? And the goal, of course, is to pay as little as possible for each percentage point of forward growth for any of these stocks. And you may know that my threshold typically to even consider buying a stock is I want a minimum of revenue growth of 30%. So in this case, only Fubo would qualify. Only Fubo is at 30%. But we'll see that Zoom and Roku, there are special reasons as to why they are not growing at that level yet. These stocks have been impacted by macro, and Zoom has been impacted by the end of the events of 2020, right? Which is why Zoom so much less used. So there's structural reasons as to why Zoom and Roku are not showing the growth that many investors probably expected when they bought those stocks 2 years ago. Nonetheless, here are my thoughts about each of these stocks. So let me get started with Zoom. So very importantly, Zoom, the main argument is, I mean, we all know what Zoom is. We've all used Zoom. Zoom is a premium video conference software. It's known to be very easy to use. You just send a link and you connect. And Zoom, very interestingly, was started by a team that was working at Cisco WebEx, right? And Cisco WebEx was this old world company still stuck in the past. The system was not working. The CEO left with engineers and founded Zoom. And I've actually both used Zoom and Cisco WebEx, and there's no comparison. Zoom is leaps and bounds ahead of WebEx. Interestingly enough, some companies still use WebEx. Cisco WebEx still a thing, right? Not everybody uses Teams, but the whole point is that right now the two main players in the video conferencing space at work are Zoom and Teams, the Teams bundle and the Zoom bundle. And so Zoom tries to incorporate a whole bunch of premium features into Zoom to make Zoom more appealing to a lot of professional buyers, right? And that's the same idea, for example, as Teams versus Slack. Teams technically does a lot of the stuff that Slack does, but you have a lot of very avid Slack users, and there's no way they're going to use Teams. They want to use the premium product for their company. They want to use Slack. The same is true for video conferencing. Some companies really want to use the high-end product for the video conferencing tools, and that high-end product is Zoom and not Teams. And there's also obvious reasons as to why sometimes large companies try to not buy products from Microsoft, because they're overly dependent on Microsoft already. Imagine you're a company, you already have Azure, you have Windows, you have Office 365. You're already very, very dependent on Microsoft. Many companies want to do as much as they can to not depend too much on Microsoft, and that alone is actually a selling point for Zoom. So that's for the quality of the business. I think the business is fine. I think it's the high-end video conferencing business, and therefore there will always be a customer somewhere who wants the high-end business and who doesn't want to be dependent on Microsoft. Nonetheless, there is a problem with Zoom. The problem with Zoom for me is obviously the revenue growth. The revenue growth is very low right now because even though we're growing professional users adequately, actually really well. They're gaining on new customers. Their numbers of customers with more than $100,000 in sales are actually through the roof. They're doing really well in the professional space, but they're still losing customers from their individual users, the non-pro users. Those are still dropping off. Those Zoom users are still dropping off. Those private customers are still slowly dropping off, and that creates an overhang. Kind of like C Limited is going through its gaming division. If you follow C Limited, UiPath is in a similar situation where they're moving to a subscription system, and they had software licenses. This is a company that has a transition between its two main lines of business. It has a transition from private at-home use by private individuals to use by the enterprise. And because of that, the top line number is showing only 5%. Now, if this is a company that was done with this overhang and actually were to resume at the level that I like to see, which is 30% revenue growth, their metric would be a 0.14, which would be very, very cheap at a 0.14. That would be, if that company were to resume growth, it would be very, very cheap. And I just want to point out too that with this type of gross margin and this type of price to sales, this is a company that should be beginning to attract a lot of value investors, and a lot of people that are value oriented should be very interested in Zoom because it's a profitable, steady Eddie business at this point, extremely profitable. So that's my point on Zoom. Growth is too low for me, unfortunately. Roku now. What about Roku now? Now, if you're in Europe, my European friends may say, why do you talk about Roku? Well, if you're in Europe, we don't realize that, right? But in the US, I'm located in the US, of course, and in the US, I see Roku everywhere. Roku's everywhere here. You go to Walmart, Target, Costco, you name it. Roku TVs are all over the place. Sometimes the Roku branded TV with a Roku brand. Other times it's the main brand that has the Roku software. And the whole question is, do you buy a TV for the quality of the screen and the reputation of the brand, or do you buy a TV for its operating system? And my view is that if people are still going to be buying TVs in the future, they will be buying them based on the operating system and not based on the quality of the screen. And this is where a lot, I think, of legacy TV makers like LG, for example, are going to be in deep trouble because they're focusing on the quality of the screen, or Samsung, right? They're focusing on the quality of that, and they end up with horrible software like WebOS or LGOS. I can't remember the name of all of these software, but they're not very, very good. And those software, you don't want to have those. So you end up in an odd situation where sometimes someone will have an LG TV, and of course LG TV being manufacturer number N on the list, they're going to be the seventh one to have the app that you need to stream, right? Roku, once you have Roku as an operating system, you have the advantage that if there's a TV station that you like to watch and it happens to be a local TV station only in your town, they're going to have an app on Roku. We are not necessarily going to have an app on WebOS for Sony TVs or anything like that. Does that make sense? There can only be room for a few operating systems. It's the war of operating systems for TVs. And I don't know about the rest of the war, but I can tell you in the US, they are winning that war. In the US, it's them and Android TV. Android TV is doing well. And then you have some niche players like Apple TV, Amazon Fire. That's another one. That's kind of a niche in my view. But Roku to me is the clear leader in that because they were the early movers, right? They have the early mover advantage. So what is it? If you're buying into Roku, you're buying into a pure play operating system for the TV, but really, is it really a television anymore? Should we really still call it a television when linear TV is mostly dead today? I'm going to call it the big screen in our homes. This is the operating system for the big screen in our home. And to have access to this exposure, you could either own big tech, you own Apple, Amazon, or Google, or you actually can buy a pure play in the name of Roku. So that's the pure play company in this space. Now, what's the problem for Roku? Because Roku, the gross margin is actually just fine. If you look at the streaming world, that's a pretty decent gross margin for that space, right? For that space. Problem with Roku is of course advertising spend. This is a company that makes most of its money still from advertising. Advertising on the platform. When you open Roku, you typically have an ad. You'll have local businesses advertise, etc. They make money on advertising, and of course, right now with the macro, we're still going through a major slowdown in advertising, right? Many of you have pointed out, for example, the very poor results of PubMatic, right? If PubMatic is any indication of the state of advertising, is we know the state of advertising right now is not doing too well. Yeah, Google's holding up, Facebook's holding up, but the periphery, right? Any player number N is really not holding up too much with advertising because advertising on Roku is not a priority for businesses right now. Right now, businesses want to advertise on Google. That's the priority, right? But as the Fed pivots, as we get out of this pseudo recession that I'm calling it, as we get out of this business sentiment, advertising will inevitably bounce back, in my view. And when advertising bounces back, I have no issue seeing this company growing at 30% revenue growth year over year again. And if they do that, then that would give me an enterprise value over gross profit over revenue growth metric of a 0.24, which would be very cheap. Right now, though, Roku is a little bit more expensive than average. Zoom, by the way, I'm not sure I said that earlier, but it's actually a lot more expensive than average if you take the 5%. So 5%, 12%. What hurts these two companies in my spreadsheet is their growth rate. That's what really hurts them. And then moving on to quote unquote the winner of these free valuation stocks that I'm valuing. What is the winner? The winner is fuboTV, believe it or not. That's the winner. They are cheap right now at a 0.26, right? And this is so surprising because they're cheap despite an awful gross margin. I'll get to that in the next slide. But briefly, so what does fuboTV is? Well, very interesting. So fuboTV is a streaming platform catering to sports fans. And they stream more than just sports, and they try to stream regular TV as well. But here's my point: is I don't think you would want to buy Fubo TV if you were not into the streaming of sports, because if you're just into the streaming of linear TV, which is dying, by the way, sports is remaining alive. There's still a lot of interest in watching live sports, but in watching live TV, that interest is going away. I am fairly confident that live TV is going away. And so if you wanted to as a customer, right? If you wanted to buy live TV and you were still in that 30% of people in the US who still have a linear TV, if you wanted that, you'd get YouTube TV or you'd get Sling TV. Sling TV belongs to Dish. You'd get one of these services that are very cheap, very general, and you can just get live TV on your computer or on your TV going through the internet, right? That's what you would use. Fubo TV, I believe you would use for sports. And keep in mind, as far as live linear TV goes, I think sports will be the last thing standing. Like sports will be the last one standing because there is obvious interest as to why you would want to watch sports live, right? We want to watch sports live because sports fans like to talk to each other. They like to brag. You know how it works, right? And so, per my understanding, Fubo TV has the most sports at the lowest cost. So they really specialize in sports and they let you stream the most sports at the lowest cost. However, that is my understanding in my research today, and I am not a sports fan. I'm not a big sports fan, at least. So I have no way to tell you when I look at the lineup of Fubo. I have no way to say whether it's so much better than all of the other networks or not. Like, I can't really say. Is it so much better than, say, a Sling TV, which also has a sports offering? How much better is Fubo TV compared to Sling's TV sport-oriented subscription? Because Sling TV has one that's oriented towards sports. How much better is it? I believe you'd have to be a sports fan to know that, and I'm not as big of a sports buff. Therefore, I don't know. I can't know for sure, which would be kind of a qualitative issue I would have into buying this stock. Nonetheless, so Fubo TV, kudos to them, growing very fast, 35%. This is very nice growth. Cheapest on my spreadsheet. There's only one problem, and I don't understand it. It's like 7% gross margin, and keep in mind that's not even the growth that I'm getting on Yahoo Finance or on Seeking Alpha. No, this is the growth that they've just achieved last quarter, right? I found that number in their last shareholders letter at the beginning of August. So they've just reached 7% gross margin. So what that tells me at 7% gross margin is that this is a company that is not optimized yet for gross margin. And if you know anything about this channel, is I don't invest in companies that are not yet optimized for gross margin. I want my companies to be at least in the gross margin phase in order for me to invest, which is why I would want to stay a little bit away, because to me that's too low. And the closest peer I could find to the streaming platform that Fubo TV is Netflix. Netflix is the closest peer, and Netflix has a 39% gross margin. So the question is, eventually, would the gross margin at Fubo TV eventually eventually lean towards the 40% range. I think that's a debate here because they have to pay for sports rights, right? And Netflix has to pay for producing shows. So they're both pretty expensive. I don't know which one is more expensive, but clearly the fact that Fubo has such a low gross margin tells me that those sports rights, they must not be that cheap. That's what this tells me. It must not be that cheap to stream sports. However, if the gross margin of a fuboTV was similar to the gross margin of Netflix, for example, the enterprise value over gross profit over revenue growth, right? The cost on that metric would be a 0.05, which would be dirt cheap. Very, very, very cheap. So in conclusion, the only stock that I find undervalued out of these three right now is fuboTV. Maybe for good reason, because they're not optimized yet for gross margin. But I find them undervalued per my spreadsheet. That's what my spreadsheet is showing. If growth were to resume and spring back for Zoom and Roku, if they were to get back into the 30-ish% range of growth, they would also be very, very, very cheap. But keep in mind, the way I value stocks is all about that revenue growth. It's all about rewarding revenue growth for stocks because I am a hypergrowth investor. I want my stocks to see great adoption in the underlying product that they sell or service that they sell, right? And so great adoption can only be seen through the lens of sales, right? Sales don't lie, revenues don't lie, customers giving up cash to get your service, that doesn't lie. And that's how you can see the start of that product adoption curve, which I love so much in my style of investing. So this was not investment advice. This was just entertainment. Hope you were entertained. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your likes, your subscribe, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thanks for watching.